The carriage door swung open before the wheels had fully stopped, and Evelina Ashworth stepped down into a courtyard that felt colder than the winter air around her. She had barely smoothed her traveling cloak when she heard his voice, sharp and careless, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "See that the dowry is settled in the East Wing," the Duke said to his steward, not even glancing her way. "That is all she is here for." Evelina froze. The words landed like a slap, though his tone never rose. Around them, servants lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear, but she saw the flicker of pity on a young maid's face, and that was worse than the insult itself. She lifted her chin instead of letting her eyes fall. She would not give him the satisfaction of watching her crumble on her very first day as his wife. Alastair Ravenshaw, Duke of Blackthorn, turned only briefly to study her, his gaze cool and assessing, as though she were a ledger entry rather than a person. He noted her plain gray dress, her steady posture, the way her hands were folded tightly to hide their trembling. Satisfied that she understood her place, he turned and walked toward the manor without another word, leaving her standing in the courtyard with nothing but the wind and the weight of his dismissal. The marriage had been arranged 3 months earlier, a solution to her father's mounting debts and the Duke's need for the fortune attached to her name. Neither of them had chosen this. But Evelina had believed, foolishly perhaps, that duty might soften into something bearable, even kind. His words in the courtyard told her otherwise. That night, alone in a bedroom larger than her family's entire home, she did not weep. She sat by the window and watched the moon rise over unfamiliar hills, and she made herself a quiet promise. She would not beg for his affection, and she would not shrink into invisibility simply because he wished her to. The next morning, she rose before the household stirred and asked the housekeeper, a stern woman named Margaret, to walk her through the estate's accounts. Margaret hesitated, clearly unused to a duchess taking interest in such matters, but something in Evelina's calm insistence made her comply. By midday, Evelina had already found 3 errors in the ledgers, mistakes that had cost the estate a considerable sum over the past year. She corrected them without fanfare, then asked to see the tenant records next. Margaret watched her with growing curiosity, unsure what to make of this quiet young woman who carried herself like someone determined to matter, despite being told she did not. From his study window, Alastair happened to glance down at the courtyard and saw his new wife walking briskly toward the stables, listening intently as a groundskeeper explained a problem with the drainage near the eastern fields. He frowned, more out of habit than genuine interest, and returned to his papers. He did not yet realize that the woman he had dismissed as nothing was about to become impossible to ignore. Days passed in this quiet rhythm. Evelina worked, observed, and slowly began to understand the estate better than anyone had in years. Alastair remained distant, but distance, she was learning, was not the same as indifference. Weeks folded into a strange, careful routine within the manor walls. Evelina rose early each day, long before the Duke emerged from his private study, and spent her mornings among the tenants and staff, learning names, listening to complaints, and fixing small problems that no one else had bothered to notice. The estate, she discovered, had been quietly neglected for years, its fields underfed and its accounts mismanaged by men more interested in flattering the Duke than serving him honestly. Margaret, once wary of her new mistress, had become something close to an ally. She began seeking Evelina's opinion on household matters, impressed by her sharp mind and her refusal to complain, even when the work was hard or the hours long. Among the younger staff, whispers started to spread, not of pity now, but of quiet admiration. Alastair heard the whispers too, though he pretended not to. He caught fragments of conversation in the hallways, servants praising the new duchess for resolving a dispute between 2 tenant families over a boundary line, or for arranging proper medical care for a sick stable boy without waiting for his approval. Each report irritated him slightly, though he could not explain why. He told himself it was simply surprise, nothing more. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. He found Evelina in the estate office long after supper, poring over documents by candlelight, her brow furrowed in concentration. She did not notice him at first, and he took a moment to observe her without the mask she wore in his presence, the guarded politeness she offered him and no one else. "You should not still be working," he said, startling her. She looked up, composed within seconds. "The harvest records were incomplete. I wanted to understand why before the accountant arrives tomorrow." He stepped closer, glancing at the papers spread before her. "And did you find your answer?" "I did. Your previous accountant was skimming grain from 3 of your tenant farms and reporting false losses." She said it plainly, without triumph, simply stating a fact she believed he deserved to know. Alistair said nothing for a long moment. He had suspected something was wrong for over a year, but had never taken the time to investigate. His new wife, whom he had reduced to a mere transaction on their wedding day, had uncovered in weeks what he had failed to notice in months. "Why," he asked slowly, "would you care so much about an estate that treats you like a stranger?" Evelina met his eyes without flinching. "Because it is my home now, whether you wanted me here or not. I intend to make something honest of it, even if you never notice." Something shifted in his expression, something he quickly tried to smooth away, but not before she saw it. He left the room without another word, but the next morning he summoned the accountant himself and confronted the man with the evidence Evelina had gathered. The dishonest accountant was dismissed by afternoon. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was the first time Alistair had acted on her word rather than dismissing it. Evelina noticed. So did the household. And though neither of them spoke of it directly, something between them had quietly begun to change, like ice beginning to thin beneath a frozen lake, unnoticed until the first crack finally appears. The fire began in the tenant village just after midnight. A lantern knocked over in a barn during a sudden storm, and within minutes, flames were climbing toward the thatched roofs of 3 cottages standing close together. Evelina was among the first to hear the shouting, and she was out of the manor and running toward the smoke before anyone thought to stop her. By the time Alistair reached the village, roused from sleep by a frantic servant, he found Evelina already organizing a line of villagers passing buckets of water from the well, her hair loose and her nightgown soaked through, giving instructions with a calm authority that steadied the panicking crowd. He stood frozen for a moment, stunned not by the fire, but by her. "Get the children away from the smoke," she called to him, not as a duchess ordering her duke, but as one person trusting another to help. Without thinking, he obeyed, gathering frightened children and elderly villagers to safer ground while Evelina continued directing the effort to save what home she could. They worked through the night, side by side for the first time since their wedding, and by dawn, 2 of the 3 cottages still stood, blackened but salvageable. The third was lost, but no lives had been taken, thanks largely to Evelina's quick thinking and refusal to panic. The villagers thanked her with tears and gratitude, and Alistair watched, exhausted and covered in soot, as his wife knelt to comfort a weeping child who had lost her home. Later that morning, as the sun rose fully over the smoldering ruins, Alistair found Evelina sitting alone near the well, her hands raw and blistered from the night's work. He sat beside her without asking permission, an act so unlike him that she glanced at him in surprise. "I misjudged you," he said quietly, staring at the ashes in the distance rather than at her. "On our wedding day and every day since." Evelina did not answer immediately. She had waited weeks to hear something like an apology, and now that it had come, she found she needed more than words. "You judged me before you knew me at all," she said. "That is what stayed with me, not the insult itself, but how easily you believed it." Alistair absorbed this, his jaw tight. "I was engaged once before you," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "She wanted my title, not me. I convinced myself every marriage would be the same, so I decided not to feel anything at all before I could be disappointed again." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. Evelina studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. For the first time since her arrival at Blackthorn, she saw not a cold and distant duke, but a man who had built walls out of old wounds, and who was, perhaps for the first time, beginning to consider taking them down. News of the fire, and of the Duchess who had run toward it instead of away, spread quickly beyond the estate, reaching the ears of society within the week. Among those who heard it was Lady Constance Whitmore, Alastair's former fiancée, who arrived at Blackthorn under the polite excuse of offering condolences for the village's loss, though her true purpose was far less charitable. Constance had broken their engagement years earlier for a wealthier match that had since crumbled, and now, hearing whispers of the Duke's growing admiration for his overlooked wife, she found herself unwilling to let him go so easily. Over tea in the drawing room, she spoke sweetly to Evelina while subtly reminding Alastair, in front of the household, of shared memories from their past courtship, watching carefully for any flicker of the old affection to return to his eyes. Evelina said little during the visit, but she noticed everything: the practiced way Constance touched Alastair's arm, the stories designed to make her feel like an outsider in her own home. When Constance finally suggested, with false sympathy, that perhaps Evelina found estate matters more comfortable than the demands of proper society, Evelina simply smiled and excused herself, refusing to be baited into a public quarrel. Alastair, however, saw through the performance entirely. That evening, he found Constance attempting one final private conversation in the garden, hinting that their old engagement could still be revived now that she was free again. He listened politely until she finished, then answered with a calm certainty that surprised even himself. "I once believed love was a transaction, the same lesson you taught me years ago," he said. "My wife taught me otherwise without ever trying to. I will not make the mistake of choosing convenience over character a second time." Constance left Blackthorn the following morning, her plans unraveled. When Alastair found Evelina later that day, he did not simply thank her for enduring the visit with such grace. He apologized again, more fully this time, for the words he had spoken on their wedding day and for every cold silence since. "You called me nothing but a dowry," Evelina reminded him softly, not out of cruelty, but because the wound still lingered somewhere beneath her composure. "I was wrong," he said simply. "You are the reason this estate still stands, the reason a village did not burn to nothing, and the reason I am beginning to understand what I nearly threw away out of fear." For the first time, Evelina allowed herself to believe him completely. Autumn had settled fully over Blackthorn by the time Alastair called the entire household together in the great hall, servants and tenants alike filling the space usually reserved for formal occasions. Evelina stood near the back, uncertain why she had been asked to attend, until Alastair stepped forward and asked her to join him at the front of the room. Before everyone who had witnessed his coldness on her first day, and everyone who had since watched her quiet transformation of the estate, Alastair spoke without hesitation. "Months ago, I called my wife nothing but a dowry in this very house in front of many of you," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "I was wrong then, and I have known it for some time. She has rebuilt what I neglected, protected what I nearly lost, and shown more courage in one night than I have shown in years." He turned to Evelina, taking her hands gently in his own. "I do not ask you to forget how our marriage began. I only ask for the chance to prove how it continues." He then presented her with a simple gold ring, not as part of any wedding contract, but as a personal gift, chosen entirely by him, a symbol separate from the arrangement that had first bound them together. Evelina felt the weight of every eye in the room, but for once it did not feel like judgment. It felt like witness. She looked at the man who had once dismissed her so easily and saw instead someone who had earned, through months of honest effort, the right to stand beside her as an equal. "I did not marry you for love," she said quietly, loud enough only for him to hear. "But I find that I am no longer opposed to it." A small, genuine smile broke across his face, the first she had ever truly seen from him. The household erupted into quiet applause, and Margaret, watching from the doorway, wiped her eyes with unabashed satisfaction. In the months that followed, Blackthorn flourished under their shared care, its fields restored, its people content, its halls no longer echoing with cold silence. Evelina never forgot the words spoken on her first day, but she no longer let them define her. She had arrived as a dowry, dismissed and unseen. She remained as a duchess who had proven, through patience and quiet strength, exactly what she was worth all along.